we saw there wasn't a lot of conversations being had around love and money and how to engage couples and partners on something that obviously we feel is super important here. So in thinking about where the opportunities were to grow a practice, to be able to fit into the realm of content creation for personal finance, this was something that was really just staring right at us. And we're like, hey, we're a couple, we're experiencing these things, and we have the pedigree and experience to offer hopefully a lot of valuable advice to individuals who are willing to listen or consume that.
Welcome to The Human Side of Money, a show dedicated to equipping financial advisors with the skill set required to work with emotional human beings on the emotionally charged topic of money. You'll get practical tips and insights on applying behavioral finance into your practice from conversations with fellow advisors, industry consultants, and experts in the fields of behavior, psychology, communication, and more. Each episode is designed to help you enhance client outcomes and forever change the trajectory of your advisory business. Now here's your host, Brendan Frazier.
This is the second ever two-guest episode. So I'm excited about that because it's only the second time ever. I'm also excited because you guys bring a pretty cool perspective into what we're going to be talking about today. Couples, love, money. If you think about it differently, let me know. But you have you write and talk about your own personal dynamic and journey and how you work with it with yourselves as a couple. But you also bring we have an advisory business and work with clients frame to the conversation as well. So it's like two really powerful ways to come into it and look at this topic. So that I'm excited about that. And I think the most natural question to start is writing a book isn't easy. Putting out a newsletter with good quality content, writing that isn't easy, particularly when you already have a business and you've got kids and responsibilities. But something happened to where you guys thought to yourselves, you know what? We want to write and educate and teach people about love and money. So what was the impetus for this? And at any point, did you look at each other and go, are we losing our minds? What are we doing here?
The answer is yes, we are losing our minds. But you know what? I think that since the beginning of when Doug started his financial planning practice, Bonafide Wealth, 8 years ago now, we have always viewed ourselves as a reflection of the clients that we wish to serve. And so, back from when this all began, that has kind of always been the ethos, and that we're going through this with you. And, from the time that, Doug and I both had a significant ledger of student loan debt, and we're helping clients figure out how to navigate that, refinance, manage their cash flow and kind of start their professional lives, straight through to where we are now. I mean, we have always kind of felt that we have grown up alongside the clients that we serve in the practice. And so, as we, during the pandemic, kind of faced some of our own personal struggles and our own personal kind of self-reflective moments of what are we doing here? Is this where we want to be? How did we reach this point as two people that, as you kind of have already alluded to, are so conscious, are so mindful, are so self-aware of our own, not only our own financial decisions and values, but how did we get to a point where we kind of lost sight of some of those things? And what are some of those issues, and how do we address them? And so it kind of felt like there's a piece of it we want to do all of this, but we also kind of felt like we had to. It felt like we weren't, it felt like we had to. This felt like the next natural step, not only for the practice, for the brand, for the message, for all the work that we're doing, but just, to be transparent and share those stories from our own lives, knowing that they're really going to help other people.
It also felt like an opportunity, right? And not to be so much down the road of what's opportunistic for us, but it felt like a really wonderful opportunity as someone who's been, creating content in the space and has been around wealth management for a very long time. There are so many corners and avenues of wealth management that have been covered and continue to be covered very, very well. And one of the things, and look, you go back to, the opportunity that was focusing on millennials and money when I first started thinking about how I was going to grow a practice. I don't think you can be like, I'm a financial advisor for millennials today and think you're doing anything, novel here. now it seems like the opportunity is, hey, we saw there wasn't a lot of conversations being had around love and money and how to engage couples and partners on something that obviously we feel is super important here. So in thinking about where the opportunities were to grow a practice, to be able to fit into the realm of content creation for personal finance, this was something that was really just staring right at us. And we're like, hey, we're a couple, we're experiencing these things, and we have the pedigree and experience to offer hopefully a lot of valuable advice to individuals who are willing to listen or consume that.
I think that what makes us unique, Douglas and I specifically, is that he is an expert. He is a financial expert. He's been doing this for a long time, and I'm not. I am a lawyer. I was trained in another profession, and I'm an educated person who was still found herself like not educated around money the way that I should have been. And I think that I'm kind of like the anti-expert expert. And I think I bring a very realistic approach to my work and my writing and my thought process around a lot of this. And I think that it's real. I am not another talking head telling you these are the 8 things that you should do because I see this in my practice. I'm a real person who is educated and who does read and who does try and who did have all of those tools at my disposal and was once on top and engaged in my personal finances and fell from that. And we need to explore the reasons why, especially women, why women disengage from the conversation and what we can do to change that. So I view my voice, especially when it comes to like our newsletter, as like the anti-expert expert. Like I write from the layperson's perspective and I speak from the layperson's perspective. And I think that's a really important voice in this space as well.
I think it becomes increasingly more difficult for advisors as they get more and more experience and comfortable with how they talk about finance to remember the ways in which, as Heather's talking about, the layperson's way. And that's kind of a superpower here, is that, she doesn't have the jargon pre-programmed in her mind. It is effortless to be able to have real conversations around money or relationships or the intersection of those things without getting caught up. I'm good at it, but in a meeting, I'll have to be like, wait a minute, that sentence I just said to a client, I apologize. Let me walk that back and say that like a normal person. So she's got a great point there. And I think that's one of the key parts or benefits in working together on these projects.
Yeah, you're sitting in a meeting and you're like, so we're going to take a look at your cash flow and then generate the probability of success. And she's like, wait a minute, hang on. Whoa, what? Like, what are we talking about here? Heather, I think you just said, I think if I heard you right, that you were somebody who was on top of things and then fell from that.
Yes.
What does that mean? Like fell from?
I think I would say that I am someone who was a very active daily, weekly participant in our joint finances in our 20s and basically gave Doug the majority of control is not the right word. I delegated a majority of those responsibilities to Doug at a certain point in time and found myself no longer as connected as I should be to our personal finances. And I can tell you exactly when that happened. If that's going to be your next question, when did that happen? COVID. It happened during the pandemic. When COVID started, our children were 1 and 4. I was a corporate lawyer working in the general counsel's office of a Fortune 50 company. And, when we looked at our situation and our delegation of duties within our household, we had to decide who was going to handle what. And there was this notion as well that like Doug was earning a lot more money than me still. And when that happens, you begin to ask, tell yourself these messages about who deserves what type of time. And so I took on a lot of our household responsibilities. And I took on a lot of the caregiving for our children and still handled my job. And our personal finances were like, that's in Doug's wheelhouse. This is something he can still maintain. He can still do this. And so it kind of became this thing where like, well, that's the thing that he's got. He's got this. I don't really need to worry about any of this. I know it's enough. Like I had tricked myself, and we've written about this before. And I think a lot of people do this when they disengage from like the nuances of their personal financial situation, where they say, well, I know we have enough, whatever enough is.
Mm-hmm.
But they say, I know we're doing fine, so I don't really have to worry about it. And I kind of fell into that trap. And that was really the point that I realized a couple years down the road, like, I'm really not as connected to this as I should be. I'm really not as engaged as I should be. And this is gonna hurt me now and down the line.
Do you think, I mean, I'm just trying to like parse through this in my mind and asking it from the standpoint of like, you guys are a couple and this is a money thing. Do you, like you mentioned, part of it sounds like was time, like with COVID, and you had this job, and then you had to you were taking care of the kids, and there's household responsibilities. But then you also mentioned the financial side, where Doug was making more money. Was it like a collision of those two forces where you go, well, because I didn't have time, I needed to spend more time doing things other than managing finances. Oh, and by the way, like he was making more. So how did those two things play together? And you said there's stories that you tell yourself on the fact that he made more money than you did. It's like, what was going on in your mind around that, and how did that impact it?
I think that people in general, couples, tend to fall into this trap of valuing people's time differently.
Yeah, no doubt.
And we sometimes find ourselves doing that based upon who we believe is quote unquote contributing more. And there's an entire section of our book on the concept of contribution and what it means to contribute. And so I think that I had told myself that a lot of the invisible labor was not only not difficult for me to do, but that it wasn't really worth much, because his time was worth more being spent earning more money for the household, and that I should be picking up a majority of everything else, because I, again, my time, whether that was my time at my job, my time taking care of the kids, my time managing our house, like becoming the one woman risk manager of our entire lives at that time during COVID, like my time was worth less. And so I think that like, there's no question in my mind. And we've seen, I mean, this conversation's only really beginning, like in the discourse about the inequitable division of labor and about invisible loads of parenthood, motherhood, and how much ends up falling on women. But I think that you have to draw the connection between this and why so many women in particular have disengaged from their finances. And I saw it happen in my own life, and I'm not proud of it. But I think I'm a great example of somebody who, despite being educated, despite once having been on top of it, despite the fact that we are so conscious of these things. Like Doug and I are true partners. Like we are partners in every sense of the word. We have this very like collective view of ambition where like his success is my success is his. It didn't matter. We still got there. I still didn't know what was going on in our financial lives after a couple years of trying to stay afloat through these difficult years of not only parenting, but parenting under duress during COVID while working a full-time job. Like it was a hot mess.
So one more question on that. And Doug's over there like, why did I even show up today? I'm here. I'm still here. So if we were to try to like simplify, and maybe it's not this simple, but if I was to say, all right, you disengaged because what? Like in your mind, why do you think that was? What was the not that you knew it was happening, right? But like, as you look back on it, what do you think was the main reason for that?
I didn't have time, and my unpaid labor was being undervalued.
Okay. And at what point do you feel like you remember? Was there this like red flag moment? This like things were just like all of a sudden the alarms are going off, and you're like, I'm disengaged, I need to re-engage, or was it just this over time you kind of like it came to you? How did you realize it?
We will talk about that in the book. But it wasn't when I tripped over a sock that got left on the steps for 3 days, although that really had something to do with it. But I will tell you that the moment everything kind of changed for us, actually was kind of like a cosmic thing that had more to do with outside forces than like one moment where I was like, that's it. My job, very abruptly wanted me back in the office 4 days a week. And it kind of like came out of nowhere. And Doug and I had always talked about like working together and me coming to join the firm. I mean, I've kind of always been like the invisible partner at the firm since we started it. And there were many moments, like I said, like we kind of viewed our lives as like very like collective, like the ambition was collective. And for many years, I kind of held down this like corporate job that provided our benefits and was very safe and secure. And even though like I didn't earn as much money as Doug was earning at the firm for our household, my job played a very important role, but it was very unfulfilling to me. And we both kind of knew that for a very long time, but it was kind of like, well, Heather's, and so this was always kind of like going on in the background. And there was a certain point where I was like, well, I'm working 3 jobs. I've got my day job, I've got my silent partner and bona fide wealth job, and I've got my family and my children. And something's got to, I'm going to crack in half. Something's got to give. And when they wanted me back in the office 4 days a week, very abruptly, I just turned to him and I'm like, this is the moment. This is the moment that one of these things goes away. Like, I'm either going back in the office or I'm going to go look for a job and become the general counsel of some other company somewhere. Like, I'm either going back and you're going to become like, and my involvement with our family business is done. I'm like, I don't even want to talk about it ever again. Like, you do you. Or we're going to take the risk and I'm coming on like full time and we're going to really give this a go. So it was kind of like all these things were building up and he knew it and I knew it, but it was almost like, I won't say our hand was forced, but it kind of like the moment revealed itself. Yeah. We didn't come to it. Like the moment revealed itself.
That's still a big conversation though, right? Like the moment revealed itself, but it's like, and it's one of those things in hindsight, you see it, you hear the conversation. It's like, we had this moment, we talked through it and here we are and things are going well. But I have to imagine that was probably like a little bit more of a conversation.
Absolutely massive. I mean, the last time we had a conversation that big would be starting a family or buying a home. And we were already, 4 years out from our last kid and, 7 years out from the financial decision of buying a house. So it was quite some time, to really look and examine what the impact of making that kind of move would be. And it obviously touches directly at the heart of our household finances. And that is also a reason why we're like, okay, we need everyone in the pool. Like there is no making this decision without us getting back on track and everyone feeling like they are making a informed decision based on the realities of our financial situation. And that too was revealing for Heather of like, whoa, if I'm going to make this decision and I just spent the last X amount of years during COVID distancing myself from the financial, role that I should have kept that I should have kept up on, we need to very much dive back into this and assess why we found ourselves here. And again, full circle, this is how we got here, because it was the start of that reexamination and realizing like, obviously, we're now not only going to make a go at working together on a number of fronts pertaining to the practice, but also where do we want to take the practice? And again, here we now are showing you the direction that we chose, which is let's talk about this experience that we're now going through. We know we're not alone in that. Let's once again grow with the people that we serve by addressing this topic.
Yeah, it would be nice if there was like a framework. It was like, okay, so anytime you have this big decision to be made as a couple and it's going to impact pretty much everything in your life, but definitely your money and your household finances, here's how you should go about it. Like, here's how you think through. Because I mean, that's such an emotional conversation. It's like your worth and your value and your money, and it's all being put on the line, and it's scary, by the way. I mean,
yeah. I think that's the more complex part of it. And Heather will tell you, like, the knowing what your worth is when you go from this it's very easy to know what your worth is when an organization is paying you a paycheck and you have a salary and you know what your bonuses are roughly going to be and you're supplying these benefits to your family. And then all of that goes away and you're playing, the game that I've been playing for 20 years is you got to define that for yourself, right? And you have to do this not on a year-to-year basis, but where we're going over a 5 to 10 year period. I give Heather a ton of credit in as short of a year, and we're still getting there, but in as little of a year, to shift a 13-year career mindset of how she understood her value in going into a completely different, arena when it comes to defining that value, and me having to, not just be like, oh, it will come naturally. It doesn't come naturally. It's actually extremely unnatural to, jump into my 20-year bandwagon of, entrepreneurial, mentality and growing business and all of that kind of stuff. So I give her a ton of credit on that, but there's two facets. There's that defining your worth, which is incredibly complicated and complex, and the actual finances, right? Like sitting down again and reacquainting ourselves with fundamentals of the household, right? The net worth statement, where stuff is, how much cash we have to make this comfortable, or when do we start to become uncomfortable if we decide to do X, Y, and Z. And ironically, I'm sitting here a little relieved, truthfully, that I'm now gaining a partner in this. I don't have to be solo, when it comes to financial decisions, but you don't just, have your partner snap right into that. And I think that was very eye-opening to, all right, we have to once again set the table here and, take a look at what we need to once again educate and become aware of when it comes to all the facets of our household finances. To me, that felt like I can do that. I can catch her up to speed. We can get into the quarterly meetings. But the harder part again was wow, here's this whole thing about how she derives worth and self-worth. That is a much more complex animal to be, and a bigger beast to be wrestling with.
Mm.
And it's not just about the money, right? I mean, as Doug's just pointed out, so much of this work is about self-worth. So much of it's about self-worth, and it's about honoring your partner, and about listening to them, and about understanding what their apprehensions are, about understanding their values. And I think a lot of people have failed to have those conversations. So Brendan, when you said, wouldn't it be great if there was some sort of, template, if there was some sort of, checklist you could go through when you're making big decisions? One of our goals for this book, without telling, we can't tell people what to do, because what works for isn't going to work. What works for one couple isn't going to work for another couple. But we can facilitate better, deeper, more meaningful conversations around money that, as you can imagine, have a lot more to do with things like your values, your risk appetite, who you believe has power, how you derive that power and self-worth and value. Those conversations are way, 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 I won't say more important, but maybe more important than the actual dollars in your bank account. They're at least as important.
Helping you figure out how to have the conversations that work for you is harder than the conversations you're going to have. And one of the things that we've learned in interviewing dozens and dozens and dozens of people was really figuring out that everyone learns differently. And that I think the hard part for a lot of people was first figuring out how we learn. And one example of that would be a couple that one partner has ADHD and is never going to learn from just a sit down conversation. And you got to get out the whiteboard, or you got to touch it. You got to feel it. You got to connect with it in a very different way. Two people who learn differently trying to connect on, a singular topic might not be as easy as, hey, babe, I prepared a net worth table and wrote down some stuff for you. Let's go through it together. And, that person is thinking, oh, I went through all of this work and, this is going to be fantastic, only to sit down and be met with a lot of frustration that their partner will not absorb it that way. And when you go into those types of, when you go into things like that, you might actually figure out why people don't want to have those conversations in the first place. Because if that's the result, sitting down, one partner doing the work, sitting down, getting excited to bring them in, and it's met with resistance or, frustration, then you find yourself not just back at square one, but back a step or two. And that continues to degrade, and long-term effect is nothing great. So again, figuring out how to conduct these things or how to have that conversation is more important and arguably more difficult than the conversation itself.
What you mentioned these interviews you've been doing, and by the way, I'm going to come back in a minute. I'm going to come back to these. You guys have done a great job of previewing. I mean, it's almost like you've done these before. You're doing a great job of previewing where we're going to go as far as we can talk a little bit more tactically. But you mentioned these interviews that you've been doing. What else in these interviews has stuck out to you or surprised you that maybe you didn't expect? Where you sit there and you're like, I've talked to a lot of people, but I'm picking up on a theme here that I didn't even really consider before now.
I'd say that people associate people's feelings around money. I mean, we know that they come from that they're informed by your past, right? We know that. But I think it's really interesting to watch the ways in which people's informed and learned behaviors manifest in present day. So, for example, someone who experienced trauma as a child may either run from behavior, may either, like, for example, they could, let's say that you grew up with housing insecurity and food insecurity. That could result in one of two things. You could either end up refusing to, you could end up overbuying food and keeping a fully stocked fridge at all time and wasting food as an adult, or you could end up refusing to ever throw out a single thing and eating every leftover and taking one chicken wing home from a restaurant. So what's been very interesting, we all know, right, that our past informs our present, but watching the actual ways in which that's manifested is very interesting because it really depends. So that's been really interesting. I think also, so my background before this was in insurance. And so I kind of have a very dynamic view of risk. So I think it's been interesting for me, and I'm looking forward to continuing conversations about people's appetite for risk as well. That's been kind of interesting. I would say the one other really complex and hairy thing that we come across is the interplay between faith and values and financial decisions, and identifying the difference. And this is a little bit of this is a little spicy and a little bit of a hot take, so sorry. But
never apologize for a spicy hot take.
Yeah.
Sorry. The difference between me, I'm observing, and Doug is observing the difference between someone whose financial decisions and values are very clearly guided by faith, but then there's also folks who kind of mention it and they're oh yeah, but God will see me through at the end. After making some massive financial decision that was really detrimental to their family, and they're it's wild. So it's been very interesting. Faith and the interplay with personal responsibility has been very interesting, and it's kind of come up a handful of times, but it's the kind of thing that's really stuck with me, and I've thought about a lot, and I've wrestled with a lot on how to address it in the book.
I'll throw one in there too, and this is for folks who come from, when we're interviewing people who come from wealth, right? A lot of times we would notice they would bury that lead. We wouldn't even know where they came from till maybe the very end of an interview. Oh, by the way, Grandpa sold the business for 9 figures. At the end, here we are talking about money and how you grew up and all of that. And at the very end, we realize there's a family bank and trusts, and, and it's interesting. It wasn't just that one person, but people not really owning or stepping into the power that was, the inherited wealth that they are privy to and a part of, whether it's embarrassment or shame or not wanting to be viewed a certain way, as opposed to the ownership of it. Listen, I come from this, and here's what that privilege has afforded me and why we do the things the way we do it and where our values are derived. And I want to talk about that and really put that at the forefront of the conversation. And you find out at the very end, like, that was there the entire time. So yeah, I mean, like, people are, you're never surprised by people, but people get very interesting even at the very, very high end of the wealth spectrum, as opposed to those who I think came from, more humble means or came out of poverty, who were very much okay with sharing that origin with us and that background. So those who have are like, hey, I have, versus those who didn't are like, listen, I never had. Let me tell you about that.
That's pretty fascinating. It sounds like, from what you said, that in some of the interviews that you've done, it almost, I get the sense that you're doing more. I think ultimately my question is, what are you looking to get out of them? But it's because it sounds like you're getting a lot more conversation around, hey, here's how you think, feel, and believe around money, and less around, hey, what systems do you have set up to succeed financially? What are your financial tactics and strategies? It's more about the feelings, beliefs, and emotions behind it.
Nailed it.
Correct.
Yeah.
We started this not knowing what we were looking for. We wanted to talk to people about money, and we knew that we were going to go beyond your current cash management strategies and your investing strategies, because when you're dealing with love and money and relationships, it's not about the money in your bank account. Money is not just feelings. There are feelings behind that money, and navigating those is the challenge, because those are what guide and dictate the financial decisions that are being made. So I knew we were going to get into it, but a lot of the book really revealed itself through the conversations. And so that's when we started this project. I mean, I was a journalism, I have a journalism background before I became a lawyer. And I kind of viewed this whole thing as like, I want to learn people's stories about money in their relationship, and I want to see where it takes us. And so that was kind of like the origin of this whole thing. And so the story is really like, we spent the first 6 months not even speaking to experts. We didn't talk to other financial professionals or anyone. I started, with the research, and we started with the couples, and I just wanted to hear from people, and we spoke to them. And so we took it from there. Yeah.
We had Sonia Luter on the show. I think it was episode 116, not too long ago. And anyways, talking about love and money. And she said something that stuck with me ever since, even in the conversations that I go have with my wife when we talk about and look at money. And she's like, it's never about the money, right? Like there's always something else. And her example was like how she likes to go get her nails done. And if you look at it from if I look at it from my perspective and I look at my wife going to get her nails done and what that costs and how often that she goes, it's really easy for me, especially as somebody that's never gotten my nails done, by the way. I don't even know how beneficial, how great it must be. But I just see this line item, right? And it's like, man, that sure is a lot of money to be spending on that. But she was like, it's not actually about getting my nails done. It's about the ability to feel like put together, to feel worthy, to feel better about myself. And ever since then, I was like, ever since then, I haven't complained about that line item one time. And then I start self-reflecting, and I'm like, oh, what are the things that I'm doing to feel better about myself, to make myself to have fun? And so anyways, I think back to that all the time. And literally every time I see that line item, I look at it and I go, this isn't about the money. This isn't about the money. This isn't about the money.
That reframe flips it on its head, where, almost where it's like, that is a small price to pay to feel a certain way.
Yeah.
For some folks, that's therapy. I don't know if you know what a therapist costs every week, but it is not, a gel manicure or pedicure. It is far, far greater than that. So reframing is a huge part of it too. Go for it.
I'll give you an anecdote about Doug that is to this point, because first of all, so completely agree with Sonia on the manicure thing after having babies and feeling like my whole life was falling apart all the time and that I always looked like a hot mess express. It suddenly meant something for me to have manicures every 2 weeks. I totally get where she's coming from. With Doug, Douglas grew up in Boca Raton, Florida, which is a country club city. It's very fancy. But he grew up the son of a financial advisor and a school teacher. And he was never for want. I mean, he had everything he needed, but he certainly was not like flash and cash like a lot of the people that he grew up around. And his father drove what was it, Doug? Like a 20-year-old
1982 Volvo, and my mom had an 85 Volvo station. I mean, these were the cars they bought when my brother and I were respectively born. They were not new vehicles with multiple six figures of mileage on the engines.
And there's a lot I could go on for a very long time about this, and we kind of do talk about this early on in the book to give a good example of this idea of like
your past.
It's not my perception of the fact that he grew up in Boca and it was so fancy and whatever. Doug felt lesser than at a point in his life. And it was and for a kid who was trying to fit in and who had some social anxiety, it was really something that was kind of like embarrassing to him. And it was difficult for him in his own way, for someone who just really Doug was always really, really wanted to fit in and really wanted to be liked. And that's something that he explores a lot in therapy as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
But it was something that kind of manifested in this car, and that he felt like he had to it was really embarrassing for him. And so when Doug got his first car when we were in college, he took such good care of this car. When I mean everyone knew that Doug was obsessed with this car. You know how I told you earlier before we started recording that Doug gets these pet things and he gets obsessed with them? First one. So he got every dent popped out of this car. Hundreds of dollars he would spend at the dent guy. He had the dent guy on speed dial. And he would sit out there polishing the car. And to know Doug the way I did, I knew what it was really about. That it was this was about self-respect to Doug. And this was something that was really, really important to him for reasons that were not just vanity. This was about him replacing that feeling that he never was good enough with this car. And so I knew that, but somebody else would just say, this guy's blowing so much money on this Subaru WRX. Why is this guy? Why is this?
But it was my Subaru, and finally, I was out, and Heather really creates a great example of that. It was pride. It was pride and a reflection of me, an outward reflection of me. It wasn't about the dents. And to Heather's point, this same idea with the car will transition throughout my entire life to and in good ways and bad ways, whether it was ties or getting a stain and just all of this stuff, whether it was OCD, it's in here, right? It's so deeply ingrained in here, and the way that it manifests itself in other avenues of our life. That's the kind of stuff we want people to be able to identify in their lives. And look how Heather is able to, I'm so lucky, right? We've been together forever, and she's able to identify this in me, and I can identify things in her. But we want people who have yet to have that exploration, who have yet to be like, hey, we need to talk about why you do this and what it means to you. And I understand you in that way. Now we can have the conversation about money. You can't even get there unless you can identify these things and have those open convos, because that's who you are. That's the person. That is literally the person you fell in love with and love, and you need to get there. You need to get there.
Okay, so before we go into that and talk a little bit more about how to have those conversations, I've got one more thing that's been on my mind basically since we started. Actually, it was right before we started. I was thinking about okay, what are we going to talk about? I had this question pop into my mind. What's the biggest argument you guys have ever had around money?
Great question. And I think we ask that question to people, and I don't know if we know the answer. I would say, honestly, this whole thing with the job and me coming on board. And
maybe argument's not the right way to phrase it, right? Maybe that's a good way. It's a spicy hot way to phrase it, right? But what was the most contentious or difficult decision?
I have a different answer for that, but Heather's not wrong. I think the most involved conversation around money and what we should do with our lives, and where we felt the stakes were super high and we couldn't afford to get the decision wrong, in the most recent past would be the decision to work together and say goodbye to that corporate job and really go all in together. It's going to be very hard to rival that, just in terms of how dynamic of a decision that was. And Heather's probably right about that. And my mind, though, immediately went to something a little bit more straightforward for lack of a better word, which was buying our first home. I can't think of. I can't think there. You forgot about that.
yeah.
It's so wild to me that we almost swapped roles in our professional and personal lives in going through that process. I remember it very well. There was a home in our town where we ultimately settled on, where we had a huge, I'm like, let's just take this one. I think I was at the end of my rope with, wanting to keep going in this process. I viewed, Heather in that classic lawyer sense of, you're just going to ruin and break any and every deal. Heather's really chomping at the bit to get in here. So
I love you, but you're not really explaining this correctly. What happened was there was a home in our town that we were desperate. We were reaching the end of our search. Like, our lease was about to renew in the city. Like, we had an 8-month-old baby, and there was a home that we saw that we thought objectively was fine. We went under contract. We went to the inspection, and I brought one of my experts, because remember, I was in insurance and commercial insurance. So I had like a Rolodex of local experts that could come like inspect the house. And there were so many deal-breaking line items that were like crucially wrong with this house. Things like the house could have just exploded.
So not minor things.
No.
No, this wasn't like, there were things like there were massive foundational cracks in the home. There were like major problems with this house, things that I had seen gone wrong in some of the lawsuits that I'd managed over the years that would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I'm like, we're not closing on this house. I'm pulling out this deal. And Doug it's so funny because we're so different in this regard. Like, he is not great at the discomfort in a negotiation. Like, and I'm just like, let's go. Like, I do this for, like, discomfort is my middle name. Yeah. Like, I do this for a living. I'm willing to walk away. He wants to fix things and wants them to be done so quickly and simply. And he just wanted to find a place for us to live. Like, I know he came from a good place, but like, I told him, I was like, I'm not signing these closing documents. You're going to sign them and live in the house alone. Like, me and the baby are not moving here with you. Like, that was the level the level we got to. But it's fun though, because like, when you ask this question, Doug thought of this very acute thing that, yes, that may have been the biggest fight. Like, we were screaming and crying and, everything. And like, I'm not moving here with you. I'm staying in the city alone.
You did.
But when I think in my mind, and this is again, like, right on point with our book, right? That financial disagreements, like, to me, the resentment that built up for 3 years before we got to the point of even being able to sit down and say what I wanted to say, and for him to really hear me and take in what I said, and then for us to make a constructive major life decision out of it, took many years. And like, someone, Eve Rodsky wrote about this in her book, Fair Play, which is a huge inspiration to me and really like guides a lot of my own thinking about division of labor. But she had said, you think you're not communicating about something, but you are. You're communicating in other ways. You're communicating by the way that you huff and puff up the stairs, by the way that you make side comments about whatever, by the way that you, refuse to, or you yell at your partner, you snap at your kids. You are communicating about money. You're just not communicating in the way you should be. I think in my mind, it wasn't a fight, but like, I was communicating about my resentment for 3 years before we sat down and had the conversation. So to me, that was the biggest, most consequential financial discussion we ever had.
And I think one of the things that kind of popped out to me whenever we're talking about anything finance related, from corporate finance down to and especially in personal finance, the concept of compounding always shows up, whether that's in the returns of your portfolio and in the following way. When Heather said it took 3 years, think of the compounding of feelings, emotions, and attitudes that have taken place during that period of time. And I think one of the biggest dangers that takes place is when you're unable to get to effective communication, is how much the feelings start to compound on top of each other, to where the longer it takes for you to get there and the more you go through these experiences, there may be another thing that happens. You didn't only get to resolve the first one, but now you got a second one coming on top of that. This ball of yarn with its knots is just getting wound and wound and wound tighter. So you know, in an opposite compounding way, it's not good. You're not compounding something good. You're actually compounding something bad that's going to take more time, energy, and resources and thinking to get yourself back to just neutral. How do you get back to a field and ground that would allow you to begin those early stages of conversation, let alone positive territory and positive ground where you can actually be proactive and make great decisions, or identify when something negative is coming your way? Hey, we gotta talk about this before we get to the point where we're shouting at each other. Thank goodness that we did. So, I mean, this is an area of finance and behavioral finance where compounding is not the thing you want when you're trying to get back to neutral. And then hopefully it becomes the thing you do want, that positive compounding of, wow, we've got our act together here. And now we can make really good decisions that result in net positive gains for our lives. And I think most people have to deal with unwinding this effect of negative compounding before they can have these very productive conversations moving forward.
Yeah, it's funny. We in financial advisor, financial planning brain, like we think of compounding. We're always like, oh man, compounding. It's the power of compounding. It's a great thing. That's why you invest money. But the compounding can work in the other way too. There's like reverse compounding, or it can compound in negative ways too. So I guess the lesson to be learned there is, as I hear you explain it, is sort of like avoiding communicating or avoiding talking about what happened or how you felt based on a decision leads to this compounding in the wrong direction, because the next thing you know, another big decision comes up. Maybe you haven't resolved it yet. So maybe the lesson there is, don't let it fester. Try to get on the same page and talk about like what's going on, why you felt the way that you did, so that you can, next time you have a big decision, you're at least better equipped or better positioned going into it.
And that change, I mean, something can build up. Like a mistake, for example, and we have a chapter on this, which is super interesting, about how mistakes don't all happen in a snap. They can take years and years and years for you to wake up one day and realize, what the hell have we been doing for 8 years? And that you're not going to fix that overnight. That half of the courage is the willingness for one of you to step up and say, I don't think we've been doing this the right way, even though we've been doing it this way for a really long time. And so unwinding that, like Doug said, can start small. We had, for example, and the way that we discussed this was in the book, is that there's a couple who was splitting everything from the time they got together. I mean, splitting like down to the dollar. They were like reconciling their like trips to Starbucks, like every cent, for years.
Wow.
And until one night it blew up. Like they were traveling, they were in Tokyo, and like the husband ordered, I guess they weren't married yet, but her boyfriend ordered 2 croissants instead of 1, and she just lost it and was like, you always order more, and we always split the bill. I mean, it was just like the whole thing. It was just like really, it was wild. And in the light of day and sobriety the next day, they realized that the way they'd been doing a lot of things had been wrong, but that they weren't really equipped, nor did they really know exactly like the right way to fix it. So it wasn't going to be this dramatic, like the next day we're just going to stop doing this thing we've been doing for 8 years. But they started doing a little differently. Like they started, for example, like just doing nice things for one another. They had never just like, they'd almost like gotten away from like gift giving, or they'd gotten away from even just saying like, hey, I went out and I thought you'd like these, I thought you'd like this, so I just bought it for you. Like they had gotten away from that because of this like bean counting mentality that they were in. So even just acts of generosity, increasing those, and kind of like being like, yeah, you know what? I want to pay for dinner tonight. We're going to go out to the movies and a dinner. I got this. Don't worry about it. And kind of like letting that go, stop, and not counting and keeping score. Those are little behaviors that over time can help them lead to a healthier place. Things like, let's save jointly for a goal together. Let's talk about a way that we can like instead of like worrying about money going down and whose money is like money going down. Let's talk about money going up and how we can both contribute equally to something positive in our lives. And that can help fix some of the resentment that's built up over time. So like, I think building on this compounding idea is that like things that take a long time to realize you've got wrong might take a long time to fix.
So I'm sitting over here thinking, like you mentioned earlier, this idea around you want to help facilitate better, deeper, more meaningful conversations for couples, like not just sitting down and saying, hey, where's the money going, but the more meaningful conversation. So I guess maybe the question is this is a big question, but how do you do that? Like just tactically speaking, what would you suggest? What do you say around, hey, here's where to start. If somebody doesn't even know where to start, what do you do? How do you do it to have better, more meaningful conversations?
Oh, this is a conversation for like fall 2025. You're jumping the gun here, Brendan.
You guys are welcome to come back on.
We will.
But I can give you just a couple general ideas from a couple general snippets from what we've been working on.
Yeah.
Obviously, communication is number one. Communication's number one. And really understanding not just the facts. And one of the experts we spoke to actually this really resonated with me. I think a lot of us know a lot about the facts of our partner's past and the facts of like what people do. Like you could say, yeah, my husband, he only likes to use cash. Why? Why does your husband only like to use cash? I don't know enough about the stories. We don't know enough of the reasons why. So I think communicating more about the why is a huge, huge piece. And that requires curiosity. Be more curious about your partner. Because I mean, I would think that folks who are in a committed relationship would want to understand the reasons driving their partner's decisions, for a number of reasons. So I think like being curious, being open. I think also like not only like how you talk about money, but this is huge. And Doug and I, this is like a big thing. We've actually written about this a couple times, like recently. When you talk about money really matters too.
Okay, yeah.
When?
You alluded to it a little bit earlier, but go ahead, explain.
No, you're stealing mine. Not fair. That was me. Yeah. Thank you for that. So yeah, like knowing the time and the place in which to be able to conduct these types of conversations. And I, for the longest time, my ADD self would, at a random, I'd run into the room. Hey, I updated, this statement,
right.
Or like, hey, this is important right now as we're trying to do homework with the kids and, cook dinner. And it's not the right moment to be busting into a room to show this. Well, I'm helping the family with finances. Let's do that right now. She's like, get away from me. How about that? So really knowing the avenue and forum in which to conduct these types of conversations it could be to do the exploration or to go through the very facts and figures of your financial life. So one thing Heather and I have done and enjoy doing is creating money dates and making sure that we're specifically carving out the time in the way in which that we're able to best communicate with one another. For some people, that could be in a quiet corner of a restaurant while sharing a glass of wine and some appetizers or having dinner together. It could be, and we do this all the time, going for walks. We love walks. We love what it does to you, not just from a health perspective, mental health, but it creates an avenue and a forum in which to have deeper communication and deeper conversations. Whatever, identify what is going to work for you and the form in which to have this type of communication. And as I mentioned earlier, understanding the ways in which to communicate. For some people, it's literally tactile or visual. For some, it's very, spreadsheet methodical. Let's, go by the numbers. So I think this is critical to, making sure that you're effectively, Heather's right with communication. That's number one, but understanding how the where and the when to communicate almost is equally as important.
And to Doug's point, and he touched on this a second ago, but really meeting your partner where they are. And that understanding that one way of doing it may not resonate for your partner, that there's lots of different ways that these things sink in. And I don't just mean like the dollars and cents of it, but let's say that you've got, you guys need to rein in spending, let's just say, and I think that there's it's not just you do this, you spend money, you whatever. It's well, what do you think? What do you think are the reasons that we are spending money on XYZ? Are you comfortable with what we're doing here? Like, I think that like it's not just meeting people where they are, but like really understanding the reasons why behind some of these financial decisions that are being made, and then finding a way that's like palatable for your partner to understand when things need to change, because it may not just be looking at a spreadsheet. We got to really meet people where they are. So that's a huge one too. And I think a lot of what we speak about in the book too, it's not just about communicating better, but it's about creating fairer, more equitable relationships and bringing partners to the table who have been like repulsed by the idea of being involved in their finances, because greater equity at home leads to greater equity in the world. And I really, really believe that. And so a huge part of the book as well will be to talk about contribution and this idea of valuing contribution that is not just the way you've thought about it in the traditional sense. Contribution is not just the salary, the income that someone brings into the household. There's lots of different ways that people that people contribute to a household. And I think that we need to rethink and honor all of them in order to give people an equal seat at the table. And that's very, very important to our finances.
When Heather and I were starting out our conversations, as we're describing to you, and she would share with me the invisible workload and the things that she was contributing to the family. And as she kept telling me and adding them and adding them and adding them, and you'd have to be, insane person not to listen to this and be like, oh my God, like, I can't believe how unfair or inequitable this truly is. When you start to act on that, my heart sank, and I'm like, I can do better. Like, this has to be better. And you start to do the little things which turn into big things. But just as you start to do the little things, pick up that basket of clothing at the bottom of the steps, put that thing away, whatever it may, those little things to you actually are massive things to the other person. And this is an area, I was going to say a moment ago, this is an area where you need to understand that things take time. You're not going to wake up one day or do one thing and instantly, things are fair and equal. But the beauty of, I think, of all of this is once you see how contribution has worked, if things have gotten fair, I think one of the beautiful parts is when you start to make those active efforts as the person where, you weren't doing more things that you could do, and you start to see the positive impact on it. It is beautiful, and it actually gives you the encouragement to build upon that. And I think great things then start to happen. So back to that like notion of compounding, that's where you actually do begin to see it. And when everyone starts feeling better, I can't even really describe it to you. You got to go do it yourself.
Leveling the playing field on contribution, and just our idea that caregiving, for example, and money are just inextricably linked.
Yeah.
And so even things like, this is such like a trope, I like hate saying this, but like that, like, oh, my wife, she spends so much money, I don't even know what it is. She goes to Target and she's just, I don't even know what happens at Target. Well, let me tell you what happens at Target. Your wife is buying 90% of your household needs. She is buying new clothes for the children back to school. She is buying your paper goods. She's buying food. She's doing all these things. So like contribution, this isn't just about like, oh, let's give care a platform. It is inextricably linked to money, and it is inextricably linked to understanding more holistically everyone's contribution to the household, and really leveling the everyone's voices when it comes to making financial decisions. It is inextricably linked.
I mean, to that point, as you guys are talking about this, the thing that keeps flashing into my mind is that whenever my wife and I sit down and we do our money dates, we go through money, like when we pull it up and look at the spreadsheet, and like one of the things on there every month, like, is our like income. And so we like the cash flow that's coming in. we break it down as far as like me and then her, right? And so like she works part-time a couple days a week. She's a therapist. So Doug, when you mentioned earlier, if you know how much expensive a therapist is, I was sitting there thinking like, oh, I know, but I'd rather actually people use therapists. That's the route that we would prefer. But all right. So, but I'm sitting there thinking about it, like on there, like we show like cash flow coming in and there's a big discrepancy there, right? But like guess what's not on there is all the other things that she's doing. And so, I'm sitting here going, man, what a bad way to start the conversation. Like, I wonder how she feels when we pull it up and there's this like gap there. Like, and maybe she would say like, I'm good at it. And like, but like, I don't know, maybe that's probably not the best way to focus on it without acknowledging, like, we should probably have a line item for all the value or the dollar worth of all the other things that she does, the invisible income, essentially.
Oh yeah. I think again, back to what we said earlier about Heather making that transition from knowing, how about just going from definitively knowing what your worth is to a dollar amount in terms of contribution in working for an organization to being folded into a practice. For me, I'm like, here's the look what we bring in each month as a function of this. She goes, and you've built this with us the whole time. So it's an easy we. No, it's not an easy we for Heather. She's like, but I just said goodbye to.
And let me give you an example of how damaging it can be to tether your self-worth to your income.
Yeah.
Okay.
We've with many women who took a pause on their career to raise children, or, once they've had a baby. And I asked them whether they feel free to spend. And they all said no. Right? Maybe they didn't all say no. But a lot of women who dialed back or took, some sort of pause or left the outside workforce said that it impacted their perception of their ability to spend, their autonomy to spend. And I don't necessarily mean that their husband or spouse told them, well, you earn less money now, so now you've got to run everything by me. There was some of that, which is a little like icky, and that's a whole other thing. Mm-hmm. But a lot of that was inside. Those are things you tell yourself. And those messages come from the society that we live in that undervalues care and undervalues the other types of contribution. And so it is inextricably linked to our money. So it was interesting. And I felt that too, even though like I joined the firm and I had a very tangible role with our firm as, running business and legal for the firm, very tangible, but losing that W-2, like losing that paycheck, like I would tell Doug, I'm like, I would say to him, well, I can't afford to go buy myself spring clothes until I want to re-earn my salary within 12 months. And I'm not going to shop till then. It's austerity measures. And he's like, no one told you needed to have austerity measures. Like no one told you that. And no one told you had to re-earn your salary. Like I was like trying to pick up all these like these like cheap influencing deals for Doug for like no reason. Like they serve no purpose. Like, and it was such a huge waste of my time. Like trying to do this to like, it was about me. It wasn't about him. It wasn't like any type of sustainable growth business model for the firm. It was just like me trying to like show I can earn money here. This is my value. Like what?
It really goes to show you. And this is after the in-depth and you asked us what was the one thing the biggest argument or the biggest, conversation we got into. All of this is happening after we put all of our brain power into making the decision to do this in the first place. Right. And I think it's an amazing demonstration of how you will never just one and done have a big, as equipped as we were and as much as we went into the ins and outs of making this huge decision in our lives to find ourselves there. That did not then just take away all the feelings that Heather had in linking her self-worth to that. Look what happened. She's like, I need to go do these deals. I need to replicate my salary. I'm not going to shop. Look at all the behavioral things that were definitely not resolved in making a very informed and constructive decision, which is why this stuff follows you everywhere you go, requires you to have consistent communication and conversations around it. And just when you think you've gotten to this happy place, and are firing on all cylinders, life is going to throw you a curveball and have you make a decision that changes the game all over again for, whether that is a negative thing that's happening or an extremely positive thing that could happen, whether that's a windfall coming your way because you lost a loved one, you lost a piece of business, you sold 1 million books, or you brought in your biggest client in history of the firm and it changes the whole way in which you're going to live your life. All of these things are just going to continue to happen, and again, compounding and building, which is why this is a game that never, ever. Money is a game. You don't just win. You just get to keep playing it over and over, and different versions with new rules that are formed and new chutes and ladders that go down or up. It is insidious like that.
And it's not optional. You don't get the choice of whether or not you want to play. Like, you're going to play whether you want to or not.
You don't, unless you're watching the series alone and you truly can live off the land and make your own yurt and all that. Yeah. But yeah, you don't get to opt out. If you're interested in eating food and living and actually, going on with life, you don't get to opt out of money.
Yeah. From the financial planner perspective, I'm sure you've heard this. I'm sure you've experienced it, but I know anytime you talk about couples and money, inevitably one of the questions that almost always comes to the top is what to do when you have the spouse that's not engaged, right? Like, okay, so like we want both people to be involved and engaged, but if you have that situation, what do you do? Do you have any thoughts or ideas, ways to approach that in a healthy, effective way?
Absolutely. I mean, you're literally getting into the very presentation that Heather and I were fortunate to give not too long ago at a wonderful wealth management conference called Future Proof. We literally had an entire presentation about, how do we deal with one-sided financial relationships, particularly and for financial advisors. And the actionable items that we came away with, I'll give you some of my favorites here. Heather already touched on redefining what contribution is, that reframe, not just for individuals, but as financial advisors, we too need to rethink what it means to contribute to a household. Things that
Because there's subconscious biases there. So I think that kind of removing this idea just to synthesize that point and drive it home one more time, and then I'll let Doug continue. Is that like you want to be sure that you're removing any of your subconscious bias, that you are deferring to the person who earns more money or the only person that's earning money. I think that is what redefining contribution is all about. Go ahead.
So then there's things that sound very obvious, like engaging both partners, making it part of your practice to engage everyone in the financial planning process and in your client service meetings. Explain the importance of having both people engaged, request that they